Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Expanding the Conversation with Richard and Kofi. Today, we wanted to follow up on a live we did a few weeks ago in wake of the gruesome, just vile murder of the Henry boys, Joel and Isaiah, which was followed up with Haresh Singh. And, we just experienced sort of the sadness throughout the country. And I would even venture to say throughout the world, just to understand, just to see the gruesome way in which these young men lost their lives. And I know that it might be the case where maybe it's not featured in the media as prominently as it was when it happened, when it occurred initially, but certainly the community and the country, and especially the family of those boys, are still dealing with this. Today, Richard and I have a colleague of ours who went to St. Stanislaus College together, and her name is Kendria English. And we'll ask Kendria to introduce herself. She's a psychologist, and we've asked her to really come on today to really answer some big questions that we felt that we also ourselves wanted to understand. And those questions being, what really drives people to do something like this? And then when something like this happens, there's just so much anger. How do we process and deal with that anger? And if, someone was talking to the family or to the community, we're really interested to see, what do you say to people like this? A lot of people say in times like this, there's really nothing you can say, but we just want to understand from a psychology perspective or a therapy perspective, if there are little things that people can do to deal with this kind of trauma when it occurs. So I'll have Kendria introduce herself, and we'll get the conversation going.
So, hi, thanks for that introduction, Kofi, and for that synopsis of everything that we hope to accomplish today. I am Kendria English, known in Guyana as Kendria Thompson. I'm a mom of two girls, so I always start with that, which I'm prideful about. I am a wife of 13 years. When I was growing up, I lived in West Rheinveld before migrating to the United States. I am a psychologist for 19 years. I worked in different aspects of psychology. And for me, I know that I feel things a lot stronger than most people do. I'm not one of those surface people. I feel things a little bit more deeply. So I pride myself on being an empath, if I had to label myself correctly. I lead with my heart in everything that I do. And my goal today is to actually communicate to you effectively, or hope to accomplish, is that I will be able to communicate to you a way that we can find our voice through this difficult time. And because we always have to act and honor ourselves, and we can find a way to honor other people. So I'm happy to be on this forum here today. And I do thank you for inviting me, Kofi and Richard, to join this conversation.
We're happy to have you. I'll have Richard maybe make a couple of remarks, and as we get this conversation going, maybe Richard, you could kick it off.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kendria, for joining us. Like I think I said before, Kofi and I are always happy to have company. But this is important. I think a lot of times, this is not the first time something like this has happened in our society, right? We've seen it before. There's lots of times where it's happened.
Correct.
We don't always assign the same blame maybe to the situation, but I think, murder is murder. There's an impact, and it creates sort of a tension and an unrest in our society. And rarely have we had constructive conversation. We'll have people that are angry and protest and but we don't have enough constructive conversation on how do we move past this. What actions do we take to make sure that it doesn't happen, but even just as we deal with it. And so we're grateful for you to be here today to help us understand and maybe just put out some ideas as to what do we do? What do we do as a community? What do we do as family members? What do we do as a community? What do we do as a country? And maybe come up with some ideas, and maybe we'll begin the thought of having a framework as to when these things happen, how do we deal with it? Not for it to happen again, but I think we can certainly constructively talk about getting through that.
Right, and I thank you for that, Richard. I think that when situations like this happen, the stronger the pain, the stronger our faith and commitment grows. And whether it's commitment towards change, commitments fighting against injustice or anything for that matter, I think we always need, as human beings, we need to find appropriate ways of allowing our feelings in the room, right? And in our lives, we need to be able to recognize that and to be able to feel validated in that. Because if we swallow our grief and we hurt, we hide our fears, then we deny ourselves an opportunity to grow, right? And if we pretend that everything is fine when it's not, then we cut ourselves off, right, from our aliveness. And this is a situation that makes us come alive. When something like this happens, and it not only it impacts and it rattles the foundation of who we are. And right off the bat, I just wanna say that this is not about race. It was never about race. It's a bigger issue than we can actually. We need to take that. We need to take that into consideration, right? We need to recognize it as hate. We need to recognize it as a way that we cut off the life force that exists between ourselves, whether it's part of or family or a community as a country, right? And it was a way of expressing yourself. It's a way that people brand themselves. Now, I also want to say something like even before we actually go any further, is that people come together for either good or ill, right? And if those persons were pulled individually, the perpetrators of this crime, you would find that they would say, I would not have had the courage to commit such an act independently. And it tells us something about the strength of grouping, the strength of a team, the strength of gangs, the strength of clan. So in looking at this situation, I would encourage us to at least take those things as well into consideration as we move forward.
Yeah. So Kendra, tell us, I think people are kind of interested, when something like this happens, well, I don't know if we want to deal with the issue first, and maybe you've had some experience with this, but I mean, what does it take for someone to commit something like this? Because I think one of the things I said, particularly in the last time, is that even in a country like ours where we've had issues, right? And even if we could admit today, like, look, we've got issues, whether those issues are real or perceived, and we know they're real, but I'm just, laying this out sort of, academically, so to speak. Let's say we agree that we have issues, and let's even agree that we had race issues, right? Let's agree on that, just for the sake of this argument. One would say this is beyond anything that that we would agree on, to say, look, this is just not the way to solve problems that we have, right? It's not the way to solve any problem in general, taking someone's life in this sort of gruesome way. But amidst all of the challenges and the difficulties that any community or society can have, what could drive people to this? I mean, help me understand that, because I think some people think it's just hatred. I don't know. I'm just throwing the question out there. Are there things that drive people to this and make people susceptible to this kind of thing more than others, or
Yes,
are we all capable of this?
we're all capable of it because we're part of a collective consciousness. So when people get together as a group, well, like I said, whether it's for good or ill, they give up their individuality and they become part of that collective consciousness of that group. And as such, their behaviors or they act from that gut that forces you to move, that forces you to change, right? They lay the foundation of who they are as part of their identity. And whether it's about whether the collective consciousness is hate, whether the collective consciousness is racism, whether the collective consciousness is to rile up against injustice, fight for peace, or whatever. The fact of that is that this can be good or for ill, right? We just don't want to look at it in one perspective.
Yeah.
But they become part of that. It becomes the gut or the instinct, that part of themselves, this part of this grouping, then becomes the driving force, and that individuality becomes quieter, right?
Yeah.
You give up your voice to the collective consciousness. You give up your actions to the collective consciousness. You give up your morals or your values to that. And I think that that's where we need to kind of understand that situations such as this would has the potential to rise. I have a very strong spiritual background, and part of that drives me to realize that if we don't stand up against situations like this, and if we don't stand up against injustice, then the very ground, the very, as the Bible said, the very stones will cry out, right?
Yeah.
Because it's something that was wrong. It's something that hurts our foundation, something that hurts our core and guts us. It strips us of our heart, and that's where we're trying to find out what do we do as a people? Where do we go from here?
Yeah.
It's a valid question, and it should be pressed on every person's mind. Like, how do we not have this happen again? And hopefully, by the end of this conversation, we'll be able to communicate
Yeah.
that in such an effective way.
What do you think, Rich? Any thoughts?
So, I mean, I guess if I understand what you're saying, Kendria, this is for somebody to get to this point of committing an act like this. They didn't just wake up one day and decided they were going to do it, right? People either when it's one or two, when it's two or three or 10 people were gathered together having progressive conversations around this issue that culminated with this act by this one person, right? Or two, or how much ever. We don't really know how many people it's been. And so maybe, I guess in a way, we ought to sort of take stock of the companies that we keep in the conversations that we're having, right? Because I think a lot of times we tend to think that, we're having a conversation and we might just be jokingly talking about things, but it has far-reaching consequences, right? A joking conversation
Right.
about something,
Yeah.
the first time might be fine. By the 10th time, it becomes a movement. By the 11th time, somebody's taking action to take somebody else's life. And so I think if I'm understanding you correctly, like part of our solution is that we have to stop doing that, right? We
Yeah.
have to
Right.
conversations towards that good that we really want to create in society and not take
Yeah.
for granted these random conversations that we might be having.
And
Right, because part of that collective consciousness is that we take into consideration our history, this grouping of this body that came together. Now they become one. So you have to take into consideration the history, the mistrust, anger, defensiveness, people feeling voiceless for some reason or the other. These are all reasons that would propel and that would fuel the movement towards such an act. This
yeah.
is an act that was committed as a righteous, or the people feeling righteous about or justified in their actions. And as a result of that, it's a combination of all that. It's a
Yeah.
combination of,
So
your
no, I really
history
appreciate
and all that.
Sorry, I really appreciate, I mean to cut you there, I really appreciate that because I think sort of to support both of what you're saying is we also, even though there are evil elements within our society, because we are a group, because we are a part of a community, in some ways, those of us who want to see certain good outcomes, right, we have to affect the collective consciousness of the entire group
Correct.
by
Correct.
perpetuating, what's good and what's positive, as opposed to sort of allowing things to fester, and then when things like this happen, right, just we don't take any blame or we just walk away and say, well, it's not my fault. But sort of collectively we have to realize, like, look, we have to impact our community, we have to impact our country, and we have to have conversations that can change the direction that the collective consciousness is going. Whereas to say, look, we don't tolerate certain things in our society, we don't want to speak a certain way to people, we don't want to promote hatred, we want to promote things like harmony, so that we're pushing our collective consciousness in our society towards more of a positive direction than more of towards when you're fighting and always quarreling. Then you end up in this situation where you see things like this happening. It's not that you can get rid of it totally, but you really hope to reduce the frequency, right, of such a thing. So I really appreciate that. Let me switch gears here a little bit. I two other things I think we want to talk about before we continue. The first is anger, right? There is, when something like this happens, right, you're angry, you feel it, and that anger in many ways can be directed at someone, a group. People have different ways to direct their anger. I mean, tell us a little bit about the emotion of anger and how I'd imagine that everyone feels the anger. How do we constructively direct that anger in a way that doesn't, necessarily result in more of this, but is directed in a way that, maybe this is me hoping for something, but it's directed in a way that leads to justice, and less of what we've seen?
So, to answer the first question, anger is actually the fuel that powers our engine and forces us to act in an aggressive manner, right? And it is, in other words, it's a physical expression of our emotional language. Now, there are different variations, or there are different scales on which someone would express anger. Some people will be able to talk it out. Some people might be able to think it out. Some people might be able to, to exert their energy in a different way. And sometimes it leads to this amount of hatred. It's combined over time. We definitely can see that kind of hatred. And to answer your second question, in terms of how do we get past this, just like there are people that can come together for something, for evil, then we definitely can see this pursuit of people getting together for good, right? We have to pursue happiness, collective happiness, or as a collective conscious, be able to pursue that with just as much vigor, just as in order to balance this. It would require leadership.
Yeah.
And leadership not only at a community level, leadership escalated all the way. We elect leaders. And as part of that leadership, my understanding of leadership, or my vision of leadership, is that leadership is a response to human wants expressed in values, right? They have to have that same sort of common mores and values to be able to know and to meet the hearts of the people, right? Because if those basic needs aren't met, then people are still fighting to find their place, to find their balance, to find their strength, right? You're cutting them off at the knees and expecting people to be happy, and that's not something that can possibly happen.
Yeah. Richard, you want to chime in there?
Yeah, that's a powerful description of leadership. And I'm actually going to ask you to say it again because I think I
Well,
want to remember it.
how would I remember that?
I want to. I almost want to remember it word for word. And I'm sure I'll look at this many times because I do sometimes just to get the gist of it. But the reason why I think it's powerful is that as a community, right? And I know you talk about this collective consciousness, right? And I love the fact that you quoted some scriptures and talk about your spiritual background. And we have these situations arise, and oftentimes the reason why I think we don't necessarily have a productive outcome or a productive solution is because of that lack of leadership. Yes, we do elect people, and I think they ought to be held accountable for action as leaders. We have community leaders, right? People within our community that we look up to that also, I think, ought to feel that sort of like, I need to be involved in this because, as you said, right, somebody that there's a lack of that sort of somebody with a moral direction that shows up and says, well, I know you guys are angry. Let's talk about that anger. Like, how do we use that to really effect some real change rather than to go, respond in a way that's probably not going to be beneficial in the long term.
In the long term, yeah.
But leadership, I think, and that's sort of key, right? Because I agree with that definition wholeheartedly, because I think that is really a key component to getting to sort of the other side and healing and dealing with the emotions, but also making sure that it doesn't happen again. Because like you said, that leadership is required every single day. It's not just in a time of crisis, because I love the fact that you talk about the collective consciousness, because if we were having the right conversations continuously and our leaders sort of felt compelled to lead every single day, whenever you wake up, every conversation that you're having, then we probably could avoid a lot of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
But if we sort of shy away from that leadership,
yeah,
and we're all capable of being leaders, right? Like, you don't have to be in the highest position of authority anywhere. I mean, I could just be among a bunch of friends that are talking about, maybe gay rights or something else, or mistreating somebody, and I could say, well, hey guys, like I know that you guys think this is funny, but it's not, right? And in that moment, have the ability to change the tone of the conversation and I guess the ripple effects of any actions that could potentially come out, right? So that's huge. I mean, I
like
that definition. I almost want to put it up on the wall and then.
we will. I think the fact that leadership enters this conversation, kind of following on, the train of thought that we've had here, is it would appear to me that leadership has a real big effect on this collective consciousness, kind of how as a society, we set our values, what values we decide to push forward. And it is yes, elected leaders, those who are in power and those who are elected to run the country and run cities and mayors and run companies and things like that. But I think, Richard, your definition of leadership as well is individuals at community levels and wherever you are, wherever situation you find yourself in. You also are a leader and sort of have this obligation, right, to contribute to the collective consciousness in a way that is wholesome and productive rather than destructive and evil. If we're going to move the society and our group forward, right, as a people, and just as a human race, that each of us then is called in some way to make a contribution, right, to the team, to that collective consciousness that results in something more positive than negative. So our driver should always be to move forward and to use our energy and our efforts and our talent for improvement, rather than to destruction of our own kind.
Yes, I think having a sense of commitment to a group, having a sense of loyalty to a leadership, having a sense of knowing or expanding what happiness, true happiness is, happy people would not do this,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's even written into the American Constitution for life, liberty, and the pursuit of
Pursuit.
happiness.
I like that.
So the just to understand that it is such of such magnitude that it's always an aspiration that we should all strive for, because having that sense of commitment and that sense of connection to a family, to a community, to other parts of society, it allows us to feel more compassion for people.
Yeah.
And void of that vision and void of that shared movement, you would find that people will fight among themselves,
Yeah.
and they would more try to examine their differences, or they more try to showcase another person's weakness, or to find ways to justify our evil,
Yeah.
right? Rather than strive to that which makes us the same, that which unites us. And that is where pockets, such as the situation that happened here, um, that's where things like this will
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
But we have to have that sense of integrity first. We have to
So,
have that sense of unity first.
so let me ask. So let's take it to the family level.
Hmm.
Man, I can't imagine. I think we said it on the first time. Just to lose a child, we are parents. To lose a child this way, such a gruesome for a community to lose someone like this. What do you do, Kendria? How do you talk to what can we say to families like this? I mean, if you were their therapist, I don't know if you've done therapy work, but if you were their therapist, just how do families process this kind of trauma? What are some of the things therapists would do to kind of help and talk to them about things like this?
So the first thing that I would say to the family is, I am sorry. I am sorry that your sons, all three of them, were used as a vehicle to fuel the hate and anger, that they were indoctrinated into such an event as this, right? There is no justification for it. And suddenly, I mean, without any kind of fear or favor, it was wrong. It hurts us. It hurts us to the core, and we hurt with you. We, every part of Guyana, every part of the world, and just the Guyanese blood flowing through our veins, regardless of where we are across this world, across this universe, wherever we are, this has touched us. And I want you to know that we hurt with you. And I want you to know that we're deeply, deeply sorry that you had to go through this. It is not fair. It is not right. These actions, we have to find a way through our actions to honor their memories. And honoring their memories, it's not going to be through creating additional hate groups, creating biases, finding other ways to repay ill for ill. We have to raise to a higher level of consciousness. It's hard for me to say ways to forgive, right? But we have to get to a point where we can first forgive ourselves. And we have to find a way to know and to recognize our feelings in the room, and to be able to forgive somebody else in the future. I'm not saying to go out and accept somebody's apology at the moment when you're still raw and when you're still bruised. What I can say to you is, do something in such a way, accept that forgiveness through maybe planting a garden, developing a community center, maybe trying to develop like a scholarship fund. These were young, bright, vibrant lives that were cut short, but that does not limit the potential or the reach that they could have possibly had in the future, right?
Yeah.
And live that. Let their lives and their legacy be for something good, be for something that can live on in the hearts of life. Let their memories not be shattered or be read in a textbook or in the newspaper and it's gone. Find a way to celebrate their life, celebrate their youth, celebrate their enthusiasm and everything that comes from being human, from having a youthful life. And the ways that we can do that is to help other youth. Develop a community garden, plant it in their honor. Develop a way of, and you don't have to do this alone. Accept the help, accept the forgiveness from the community, accept that way that now you are now in being overwhelmed with that love and that compassion from others. Allow yourself to be vulnerable in that way. And by opening up yourself, you will be opening up, by opening up your heart, you'll be opening up yourself to a wider and grander experience that their living would not have been in vain.
Yeah.
And their death would be honorable. They weren't given an honorable death by any means,
Yeah.
but you can honor them, and the community can honor them.
Well, Kendria, thank you. I think that's probably the note. I don't know if Richard, you've got any final thoughts there?
No, I mean, I appreciate it, Kendra. That had me welling up a little bit with a little bit of emotions. I could feel the pores of my eyes. And I agree with you. I think it certainly is all great stuff. I certainly hope that this is not the last conversation we have about this. And through conversations like these, we can find ways to immortalize these people, right? They don't have to die and be forgotten.
Yeah.
And I think that's powerful. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. I truly do appreciate the experience.
Well, guys, thank you for, just listening. And Kendra, we appreciate you taking the time to talk us through this a little bit. I think there's some powerful words said here, and that, this has really become something that all of us need to take a hard look at and ask ourselves, what are we putting into society? We want to put some good in there, or we want to add a little bit more hatred to the pot. And at least for us, we want to add something positive. We want to add a little bit more love in there, a little bit more harmony, because we think that goes a long way towards, helping to reduce the incidence and the risk of this. As you said, Kendria, happy people don't generally commit crimes like this. And so I think that pursuit of happiness is really important as a people, as a country, that's where we really want to push our society towards. So thank you, guys, and we really appreciate you taking the time to expand the conversation with us. So
thank you.
Take care.